Unite. Woo! My name is Carrie Sandler. I am the Executive Director of the Software Freedom Conservancy. I'm also a lawyer, but please don't throw any fruit at me. I only do volunteer legal work now and legal work for charities and other good causes. I'm really into free and open source software. Raise your hand if you understand what software libre is. So that's like 3/4 of the people here. Good work. These are my Twitter handles. So if you are looking at your phone or your computer, I know it's because you are tweeting about how awesome this presentation is. I'm also, in addition to all of those things, I'm also a patient. I have a really big heart. I literally have a big heart. My heart is 3 times the size of a normal person's heart. It's genetic. It's basically always been that way for me. I don't have any symptoms, so I'm fine, but I'm at a very high risk of just dropping dead, of suddenly dying, which is quite heavy, and this is quite a serious topic in some ways, but it gets very uplifting, I promise. As I said, I have a very high risk of suddenly dying. The risk is like 2 to 3% chance per year compounding, which is and I was diagnosed very young. This is the kind of illness that if you hear of kids who die suddenly when they're running, when they're playing, or students when they run a marathon or something and they thought they were perfectly healthy but they suddenly died, this is the condition that is the most common one for that. So I went to the doctor, of course, and I have 3 cardiologists because a girl can never have too many cardiologists. And so the doctor said, "You're fine. Because you don't have any symptoms, we don't have to do anything about this, except we need you to get a defibrillator, an implanted pacemaker defibrillator, because if you go into sudden death, and sudden death is actually the medical term for this, if you go into sudden death, this way your defibrillator will shock you, and it'll be like people following you around with paddles, and you'll be fine, and it'll be great, so don't worry." And in the doctor's office, they have these defibrillators in their desk. They're really expensive, but they have the little defibrillators in their drawers, and what they do is they let patients hold them, and the reason is that they think that if patients hold them, they'll see they're not very scary, right? It's just this little piece of metal that's going in your body, no big deal. See how light it is, see how friendly it is. And so my doctor gives me this device across the table, and he has me, I'm holding it, and I say to him, "What does it run?" And he looks at me like I'm crazy, and I say, no, wait, what is the software on this device? Can you tell me anything about it? And the doctor said, "Software?" This doctor had never thought about the fact that there was software on the defibrillators, and this doctor implanted sometimes several of these devices per day, certainly per week. He has installed thousands of defibrillators in patients, and he has never once considered the software on these devices or that it had software. So the doctor said, don't worry. This is a very safe piece of equipment. Don't worry, you're fine. And he said, there is a representative from the medical device company who is here today in my office. So don't worry about it. I will get this person to come in. Tom, come on in the office. And so Tom comes in the office, and he says, "Ask Tom your question." And so I say, "Okay, I know I need one of these defibrillators. What does it run?" And Tom says, "What?" And I said, "Can you tell me about the software on this device?" And Tom says, "Software?" Nobody had ever asked the medical device representative about the software on these devices. So it was a really interesting situation because as someone who is I'm really geeky, right? I was a programmer. and I work at I've worked in free software for a long time. I think a lot about software, but the distinction, the separation between what I thought of as how my device works and how these doctors thought about it were completely different. And this brought me down the road of thinking, well, what does it make me if how does it change who I am if I have a defibrillator in my body, right? If I have a piece of equipment that is literally has a wire that runs through my arteries and is screwed into my heart, how does that affect me and who I am and what I think about the world? And I got really upset thinking about the fact that I was going to have metal parts in me and how hard that would be just to understand from a mental component. And so I started thinking about being a cyborg, right? There are all these good and bad ideas about being a cyborg. Literally being a cyborg is just having, it's just being aided or dependent on a mechanical or electronic device. It's just, so technically, you might even say that anybody who has glasses is a cyborg, maybe, right? The term for cyborg is ambiguous, and where that line is, I don't know. But I realized that by getting my defibrillator, I was, in fact, taking my first step, and only my first step, towards being a true cyborg. But not only am I a cyborg, I'm a cyborg lawyer, which is terrifying. Terrifying. And so I started, as a cyborg lawyer, I started doing a lot of research into the safety of the software on this device that was literally going to be put in my body. And what I found out was shocking. What I found out was that in the United States and in every other country I've researched, the administrations that approve these devices don't review the actual software on the devices. They leave software quality up to the companies that design the software. Because they are not reviewing the software, they're not even asking for a copy of the software. And then, once you have the software in your body, you can't look at it. You can't look at the software that is in your own body and connected to your own heart. And if there is a problem, you can do nothing to change it without the company that has sold your doctor the device, which is insane. This is a picture of Bill Gates as a Borg from Star Trek, and it made the rounds on the internet in the early days. And what I liked about this is that not only did I have to wrestle with the idea of becoming a cyborg in the abstract and having these foreign and metal bits in my body, but I also had to wrestle with the idea that I was also going to have proprietary software in my body, software that I couldn't see, software that I couldn't change. And as someone who thought that open source was cool, suddenly I started to realize how essential software freedom truly is, how essential software libre really is. Because when your life depends on the software that is in your body, it is a really scary thing to not be able to look at it and to not be able to change it. So once I finished looking at medical devices and got thoroughly discouraged and totally appalled, there also was a situation where where university professors were able to demonstrate that these medical devices are hackable. So most of these defibrillators have a wireless component, and they're constantly broadcasting. And these researchers showed that with no special equipment, you could take control of these defibrillators and kill someone with a lethal shock. You could also interact with their devices and get really personal information off of it, like your personal identifying numbers and your doctor's names and information about you, which is pretty scary. For those of you who are trying right now to hack my defibrillator, you can stop, because I got one that doesn't have a Wi-Fi component, but I got the last sterile, so the last possible defibrillator in the whole New York area that didn't have wireless. Now all of the devices have wireless. And once you realize how critical this is for medical devices. It's not just defibrillators, it's also insulin pumps. Insulin pumps have also been demonstrated to be completely vulnerable to attack. So it's not just that. Once you understand that, it's a very short walk to cars and automobiles, right? There's so much software in our cars. This is a slide from this is a picture from a research paper where the researchers hacked into a car, and what I love about it is that this car thinks that it's going 140 miles per hour, but it also thinks it's parked. So once you realize that your medical devices are vulnerable and your cars are vulnerable, then you start to think about voting machines and stock markets, basically all of the critical software in our society. And of course, everything is talking to everything else right now. Our phones are talking to our security systems. People have insulin pumps that they're controlling through the internet so that they can monitor their blood sugar. Even as we use our phones for the most basic things, like our phone calls, we use software like WhatsApp or anything that we use to communicate or create or do any of our basic functionality, it's all talking to other software. Our software is all in an Internet of Things. We're converging on an Internet of Things where everything talks to everything else. And when everything talks to everything else, we are only as safe as our weakest link, right? When the researchers were hacking into the cars, they didn't try to go straight to the brake system or the ignition system, right? Or the petrol systems. They went through either the entertainment system or the wheel maintenance system, which means that it's the software that seems like it's not that important that is in fact the most important. And the more that our software interacts with everything else, and the less control of our software that we have because we're using proprietary software, the less control we have of our society and our future. And what this means to me is that there are serious consequences to the technology that we're using, serious consequences that we have not even contemplated. We don't even know what they are. In the case of medical devices, people's defibrillators and insulin pumps are broadcasting constantly, and they're connected to networks that are vulnerable. So people are themselves connected to the internet, and they don't even realize that they're connected, and they definitely don't understand what it means, and they definitely can't agree, they don't even know what they're agreeing to when they agree to get their device. They're vulnerable, right? They know they need a medical device, they know they need help, but all of a sudden they are completely plunged into a world of vulnerability that they don't know about. And the medical devices are simply a metaphor. They're just a way of thinking about software, but you could say the same about all of our other important software. So I figured that software is something that you really need to care about. It's not just a tool. It's essential to who we are and what we do. So I founded the Software Freedom Conservancy, which is a nonprofit home for free and open source software for software libre projects. And we have about 40 projects right now. You may have heard of some of them. I mean, maybe some of you are using Git. I'm not sure. Samba Wine, Inkscape. We also have a project called Outreachy, which is a diversity program for women in free and open source software. We're about to open an application period, and it's all remote internships. And so if you know of talented women who might be interested in a paid internship to work on all kinds of amazing software like the Linux kernel or Mozilla or Wikimedia, we have this internship that we run where they can get paid internships to do it. So definitely check it out at outreachy.org. We've had interns from Brazil apply before, and it's been really successful. The deadline is coming up on March 30th. So we do as many possible, free and open source software projects as we can to and provide homes for existing projects so that we can help build up the alternatives that are there for free and open source software, so it's easier for people to switch. We also defend the license of free and open source software because free and open source software is predicated, it's based on a legal concept of sharing software, and if people don't respect those licenses, then it's almost as if we don't have those freedoms at all. So free and open source software, for those of you who don't know what software libre is, it's software that you can share. It's software that you have the freedom to use, software that you have the freedom to change, and software that you have the freedom to distribute those changes to others once you've made them. And so software that is software libre basically adds to the entire body of software that is good for everyone to use. You can't use software now without using some free and open source software. It would take you forever to do anything if you weren't at least going to use free and open source software tools. This is a slide I cribbed from the Linux Foundation, and it's basically like shows you all of the places where the Linux kernel is, and there's Linux in everything. There's Linux in the space station, there's Linux in cars, there's Linux probably in like all of these booths have equipment that have Linux in it. Linux is running everything, it's everywhere. And that is in part because open source has won, right? Like, everybody here knows what open source software is, right? Like, everybody here has heard of it, everybody here knows that they need to use some open source software. Maybe people have heard of GitHub and sharing your source code like that. But the problem is that while open source has won and there's free and open source software is in a lot of things, we have less freedom than we've ever had before. We have less control over our software because the bits that are free and open are getting pushed lower and lower, and everybody looks for that proprietary wrapper, which basically effectively means that our software is completely out of our control, which to me is completely terrifying. Now, I understand why open source has won. It's very, very useful and it's everywhere. And open source is big business. And who doesn't like money, right? Like there's a lot of money around free and open source software, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing that companies want to use free and open source software. It's a good thing that they employ developers that work in free and open source software. But there needs to be a balance. I'm going to tell you another story about my defibrillator. About a year ago, I was pregnant, and when I was pregnant, my heart did something that normal pregnant women's hearts do. It raced a little bit. Like, it was like a little bit, I got like some palpitations, but this happens to many, many, many pregnant women. It's nothing to be concerned about. But I had a defibrillator that basically there's very few young women have defibrillators, right? Like, it's not a common thing. So I got shocked by my defibrillator because my heart was doing something that a normal pregnant woman's heart does. I got shocked twice because the defibrillator didn't expect my heart to do what I did, and that's because I was not in the class of people that the defibrillator designers anticipated. I promise you, Medtronic, which is the company that designed my defibrillator, I promise you, Medtronic has no interest in having pregnant women get shocked. Like, it is the last thing they want. But for me, I was out of options, right? I couldn't adjust my own defibrillator. I had to take drugs that slowed my heart down, not because I needed my heart to be slowed down for any health issue. I had to take drugs to slow my heart down simply to prevent my defibrillator from giving me unnecessary treatment, which is crazy. It was totally crazy. There was no adjustments that could be made. And what this stands for is the proposition that the people who are making the software may not have you in mind, right? They may not have people in your country in mind. They may not have people with your particular issue in mind. And free and open source, and these issues about unwanted treatments, and they're just a metaphor because every software has this. We don't know if the software that the large companies are designing will be targeted for us and will be safe for us. And if it's not free and open source software, we will have no ability. I cannot change the software in my own device. I simply don't have access to it. And if I had, I wish I were, but if I were a billionaire, if I were very, very rich, I couldn't pay enough, like I couldn't pay people to do it either without convincing the one company that controls my defibrillator to do that. So 3 million people in the world have pacemakers, and every year 600,000 are implanted. This is amazing. And as our diagnostic tools and as our medical equipment becomes cheaper, this number is going to increase. Now, most of you here are very young. I don't know about you, but I'm hoping that as we all get older, there's a lot more cool stuff and a lot more medical treatments that we can have, and that'll get implanted, right? If we're lucky, everyone here will be a cyborg. Everyone here will be a cyborg, right? Because we'll have some kind of enhancement, something that we need. It's not just about people with health conditions, and it's not just about people with disabilities, right? It's about all of us, because we all will get older and we all will want to take advantage of technology as we go forward, which means that all of us are going to be cyborgs, right? We're going to be a completely new class of people, and I want control over my body. I want control over what that means to be a cyborg, right? I want us to be able to choose how that goes. I want us to be able to have some influence over the companies that provide the technology that we're going to put into our bodies, and to make sure that it works for us and doesn't manipulate us in ways that we can't even predict. Because even if the companies that are making these devices have the best of intentions, they may still get it wrong. They may not have the right people who are designing it. They may not think about every possible situation, and we are all unique, and we all have particular situations. So we need access to our software in order to do it. And so I say, Cyborgs Unite. Would anyone chant with me? Cyborgs Unite! Cyborgs Unite! Cyborgs Unite! Cyborgs Unite! Yes, thank you. So it's about the future. And if anybody cares about the future, it should be you and me and all of us together, right? Because with proprietary technology, we are at a dead end whenever that company goes out of business, right? If a company goes out of business, we can't do anything about it. We are stuck. We are done. If a company still exists, we have to wait until they admit that there's a problem and fix it. We have to convince them that our use case is what they care about. We have to convince them that they need to make the changes that we want. And we are completely powerless. We are completely out of control. We cannot review the software for safety. We are done. It is the end of the road, right? But with free and open source software, it's just the beginning of the road. With free and open source software, we are empowered. We have choice. We have options. We as a society can band together. We can write the solutions that we need, and we can make the technology that we need to in order to live safe and happy lives. And so I say, help choose free and open source software for us, for all cyborgs, and for our future cyborg selves. Thank you. I think we have a lot of time for questions. Thanks. So who has questions? You can ask them in Portuguese. There's a translator. You can ask me what it's like to be a cyborg.
Good evening. What makes free software more secure than? What makes free software more secure than proprietary softwares? And do you think that you have in the future one automatic car running free software? Que faz software livre mais seguro do que software proprietário? E você pensa que no futuro vamos ter algum carro automático rodando software livre?
Oh, great questions. So, so what makes? So I have to be honest with you. I can't stand up here and say free software is automatically safer or better than proprietary software. We all know that there are some free and open source software solutions that are better and some that are not. And the answer is really that over time, the only solutions that are better and safer over time are free and open source software. So there's this thing called the Honeymoon Effect, which is a security research paper that compares the number of vulnerabilities over time versus the number of bugs. So you would expect that the number of bugs over time decreases, right? As software becomes more mature, there are fewer and fewer problems with it. But if you look at vulnerabilities instead, there's it's a flat line and then it increases almost exponentially. And what that says is that for a while, for some period called like a honeymoon period, there is 0 vulnerabilities. And what that tells me is that software that if we were looking at our vulnerabilities of our software, it's not today that we need to worry about, but it's down the road. It's down the road when sometimes when your vendor might, when software vendors may be out of business, where where things may have broken down in relationships in the supply chain. Oh, closer to the mic. Oh, thank you. So the Honeymoon Effect paper also reviewed the safety and security of software over time, and it compared proprietary solutions with free and open source software solutions. And like many studies that have studied free and open source software versus proprietary solutions, free and open source software, when given the same effort on major systems, is freer and safer. But the important thing about free and open source software is that down the line, if there's a problem, anyone can fix it. So I think we're going to learn this the hard way. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have a lot of vulnerabilities that show that software is potentially problematic before we sort of really understand the depth of the problem. So I can't say that automatically free and open source software is better than proprietary software. It's just that over time, it is statistically likely to be, and methodologically, it's the only way we can get there. And it's the only way that we, as a society, can have control over our own software. Another question?
Oi, Karen. Parabéns pela palestra, muito legal. Não sei se você conhece um seriado americano chamado Homeland. E nesse seriado, o personagem principal, ele mata o vice-presidente americano justamente dando um choque no coração, né, do vice-presidente na época. E ilustra bem, apesar de ser uma ficção, né, mas a gente começa a pensar se esse tipo de coisa pode acontecer. Obviamente, eles não explicam como o sistema é hackeado, mas quem sabe uma coisa como essa pode realmente acontecer, né? Era só mais um comentário e se você conhecia esse seriado.
Yes, so there have been a few television shows that have had this plotline. Homeland, NCIS. It's very colorful. I think actually I'm pretty sure that me talking about this issue has sort of caused these, which is pretty cool. But it's absolutely possible because researchers have shown that it's true, that it can happen. There's a guy named Barnaby Jack who was a researcher who was listening to my podcast actually, and he decided he was famous for, his name was Barnaby Jack, and he was famous for hacking into cash machines, cash points. And so he would plug in on expo floors, he would plug into a cash machine and have money shooting out of the automatic cash machines, and he would have them flash, because his last name was Jack, his surname was Jack, he had it flash jackpot, 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 and he called jackpotting. And he turned his attention to this, and he was able to show that with an iPhone in a public place like a shopping mall, you could kill someone by getting their serial number of their insulin pump or their defibrillator with ordinary equipment. And then he mysteriously died. He mysteriously died a few weeks before he was supposed to release more of his research. It's very mysterious. And so some of these plot lines on television shows sound fantastic, but they're not. Recently, St. Jude had a vulnerability where there are basically these like black boxes that talk to pacemaker defibrillators, so that when patients sleep, the box can monitor them, and if they have a problem, it can send information to the doctor, and it can. Well, it recently turned out that those black boxes were completely vulnerable, and you could basically do a mass attack and take control of all of them remotely. And so it's not that hard to imagine kind of a larger attack because you wanted to take out one person, right, or two people. And if you think about the kinds of people who have defibrillators, I wonder how many politicians have, like older politicians and judges and people of influence have these medical devices. It could be quite high. So it's that kind of thing that it's really easy to imagine. And so it sounds fanciful on a TV show, but this is exactly what I'm worried about and exactly why I care about this issue so much. There's another question right here. There's one more before you.
Muito boa a sua palestra, gostei bastante. A minha pergunta é no sentido do governo ainda. Se você acha que com o crescimento dessas tecnologias, essas biotecnologias, o governo vai ter que criar regulamentações para limitar ou restringir alguma coisa no futuro?
That's a really good question too. I think that we do need legislation because I think we need three forms of approach. One is I think we need some societal movement towards understanding the risks of using proprietary software and understanding the benefits of free and open source software and having legislation in place that prefers free and open source software and open methodologies. I think that that's one form of approach that we need. The other is, I think, consumers. Like, I think that we need to understand as a society that we should spend our dollars, we should spend our AI on things that are ethical and that we care about, that send a message to companies that we'll buy more of their products if it's free and open source software. And then the third is that experts need to really embrace this, and they need to basically understand that the model of funding technology of trying to rely on venture capital funding is not the best way for our overall good and not necessarily in their long-term interests of their company, because most companies are more interested in their quarterly results than in their long-term profits because they're on the gun. They have to stand by their quarterly results. So I think that once professionals, so the analogy for this in the medical space is doctors, right? Like, I am not the customer of my defibrillator. It is in my body, but the defibrillator, the pacemaker is not, I didn't buy it, right? I'm not the consumer. My doctor is the consumer, right? The doctors choose which brand of medical device most patients get. So we need that like an intermediary layer of having the experts understand. And because most people that are making those kinds of critical decisions about things like defibrillators or cars or or any other product, the intersection between people who deeply understand software and people who understand the rest of the technology are analogous to like how doctors have no idea about software or any computer concepts. I mean, there are exceptions, but in general, they have that same reaction my doctor did of software, and they don't realize that there's another option. And so I think to answer the last part of your question, I don't think we're going to see a free and open source software car in the near future, but I would like to ultimately. I think we're laying all this groundwork right now for autonomous vehicles without any regard for how that's going to play out societally. I mean, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. I know that there are a lot of safety tests and safety concerns, but what's critical is that we're putting in place all of the technology that we're going to rely on for a long time about how these cars talk to each other, whether we're going to be surveilled and spied on when we go places, all of that stuff. And if it's free and open source software, we can A, understand much better what's happening, and B, we can step in if there's a problem and if the company is either uncooperative or has a massive problem.
I can speak in English. So Is there any type of initiative that we can take part to press these companies to either use free software or to open their own software so we can, like, take part and make things better?
Yes, so I think you can, there are a lot of things you can do. The most important thing you can do is ask questions, right? Like, I was the first person that ever asked my doctor about the software on these devices. Ask about important software. Talk to your families about software libre, right? Like talk about the ethical issues of the technology that we rely on. Secondly, you can support the organizations that are really active in this space. I know Software Freedom Conservancy. We're doing as much as we can. We've done some work in providing information to governments and being generally explaining, also creating alternatives. So you could support the work of Software Freedom Conservancy. The Free Software Foundation is another possible option. And I think that there's a lot more work that we can do to mobilize people to have clear courses of action to help.
You talk a little bit right now about how the user can be protected, how the user can be defended by legislation. But when you open a software, you have usually a lot of distributions of the same software, a lot of modifications, and it is usually a good thing. But what makes it not possible what protects the user from a open software modification that actually wants to harm him? I mean, the average user who does not research everything, and someone offers him, oh, this software is better than the one you are using, and it actually harms him. And what does protect him from using it on his pacemaker, for an example, or on his car and harming the whole society?
Yeah, software is vulnerable, right? Software has bugs. All software is going to be prone to attack. Every software expert will tell you that software will be vulnerable, there will be security problems. So free and open source software is going to be vulnerable and proprietary software is going to be vulnerable. The question is, what happens when you find out that there is a vulnerability, right? Like, what if the company that is responsible for the proprietary software doesn't move to fix the problem or has gone out of business? Or because a lot of equipment that has software in it is quite old, right? So, there's nothing that's stopping free and open source software from also having vulnerabilities, but we can study free and open source software to test it, to see if it has vulnerabilities, and if we find out that there are vulnerabilities, we can fix them. And we don't need to wait for any particular company to admit there's a problem or to make the fix. So for me, I think it's quite clear. While all software will be vulnerable, we need software. We're much more efficient with software. I am so grateful to have my defibrillator, right? I'm so glad that when I run across the street and to catch a bus, I don't have to worry that I'm going to die, right? I know that I've got my defibrillator, and I'm so glad for that technology. However, we really need to make sure that we have so that when we have problems, we can fix them, right? Like when I got shocked unnecessarily, I was lucky. It was only 2 shocks, and it didn't affect me or the baby. But so I think the question that you asked is dead on. But the question is, who has control when there is a problem, and what we can do when that happens. Is there? Oh, one more.
Hello. Hello. You said that last year you were pregnant, and thanks. Obrigado. And you said that you had to take a medication because your heart kept defibrillating. So it was your only option because you didn't have a wireless defibrillator, or you chose that one?
No, it was my only option because even if I had a wireless defibrillator, I couldn't change it. I couldn't do anything to change the algorithm that was in my defibrillator to determine whether or not I should get shocked. So basically, my heart was palpitating like it was normal for a pregnant woman, but it wasn't built into the basic algorithm that determined whether or not to shock. So I had to pregnant and have defibrillators. It's finite. The doctor that I went to in New York City is in charge. Does a lot of high risk obstetrics for a huge hospital in New York City. And in her entire career, she had only ever had one other woman who'd had a defibrillator. So it's just one of those things where, if you're not the intended use case, you might be getting your equipment years after it was designed. You may be in a different country. You may have any number of things that are different from the usual use case. And it's just a good explanation of why we need to care so much and preserve our software for modification later. Are there more questions, or one more?
Hello. Congratulations on your good talk. My question is, as some people here know probably, big organizations that make very popular free software, open software like Ubuntu and other operating systems, if you wanna suggest substantial changes, you need to be part of the organization. Usually you have to pay certain amount of money. So we have open software, but at the end of the day, the big changes that happen in the open software are proposed by people who have money or by the big companies that can contribute to the community. So how do you think that impacts the idea of open software and also the idea of having medical devices that, like, we're talking about community, everybody contributing to, but at the same time, not everybody can actually propose changes and, what do you think about it?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think that we as a community have ceded a lot of control to the companies that use our software and that collaborate with us. And so I think that there are different ways of adjusting the balance back towards community from companies. So one example of a way that keeps the balance is to choose more copy left. Because if a company makes changes and distributes those changes, they have to do so under the copyleft license, like the GPL, for example. And so choosing things like copyleft are an important way. Another important way of tilting the balance in the right way is to ask for copyrights on your code from your employer. So just asking, I think if enough of us ask to hold the copyrights on our software, companies will start to grant it because they'll want to attract good talent. But the message has to be sent that this is something people are really interested in. And if we have a diverse holding of copyright in the community, it's harder for companies to take such complete control and be more exclusive about the way that they contribute. There's been a lot of discussion in the free and open source software community recently about having different standards for what it means to be open source, and wondering about if it's too difficult to contribute upstream, if that is truly an open source project. And I think that explores some of the things that you're raising here. From my perspective, I think if we as a community take a little bit more ownership of our role in free and open source software and demand a little bit more from the companies that participate and benefit so much from this software, much of which started as hobbyist software, much of it started at universities, much of it started with individuals, I think that we would solve a lot of these problems that you're raising. And I think that, that insisting on keeping that balance more in line is really important. I think that if companies were really afraid that people would take their software and fork it into a viable fork and they would be left behind, I think they would be much more welcoming of upstream patches. I think, do we have time?
Question, okay.
Last question.
Yeah. Última pergunta, galera.
Inicialmente, parabéns pela palestra. Foi algo bem fenomenal como você abordou a maneira do seu problema associando com software livre e tudo. Mas eu gostaria de só perguntar uma coisa. Você está falando de open source e software livre. Qual a diferença exatamente entre as duas, assim, e qual você prefere entre open source e software livre?
Oh, wow. You asked the question of, does it matter if I say software libre, and does it matter if I say open source? So I used to believe passionately that we shouldn't care. That if we say free software, we say open source, all I care about is if I have my freedoms. right? And if I have my freedoms, then the open source definition and the free software definition basically get to the same place. There are very few licenses that are approved by the OSI and not by the, that are approved by the OSI but not defined as free by the Free Software Foundation. So it's really a real overlap in terms of their technical definition. However, recently I've sort of softened to the idea, I've seen the point. So the point that people who have insisted on using the term free software or software libre instead of open source have said that by just saying open source, we lose the ideology. People don't know that there's anything so magical about it, that it really says something to users, that it signals that with this software comes rights and freedoms, right? And so I'm now starting to, and that open source only signals a business methodology and a collaborative way of making software for the purpose of profit. And so I now sort of see, in retrospect, looking back at the last 10 years of free and open source software, I now see that really they had a point, and that I think we got further away from the ideology. It goes back to my point in my talk where, open source is in everything, but we have less freedom than ever before, right? But I think at the same time, it's really exclusionary to correct people and to make people feel like they've done something wrong if they say open source software, because that's the word that most people have come to understand. So I always say free and open source software because I want my software to be free software and open source. I want companies to invest in free software because if they don't, we're lost, right? We need to make sure that our software is good for business too, but we need to make sure we never lose sight of the ideology and that we never stop engaging in the process and that we understand that it's about the freedom to use and share our software, because that's the only way that we're going to have the societal good in the long run. So really, whatever you use to call it, be sure to always talk about ideology. Anyway, that's all we have. Thank you so much.